good.
Cool.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I'm going to let people in as well. All right, so I think we're live and I think everything is working. So if there's anything, give me a, a sign or tell me, oh, this is something's going wrong, but it should be good. So good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world joining us today. You may be in the Zoom chat, or you might be live on YouTube or on Facebook. So wherever in the world you are joining us from, you are very welcome. You might be in Europe and it's kind of around 8 or 9 a.m. there. You may be in Asia a little bit later in the afternoon, or you may be like us in Australia. It's the end of the afternoon. This is the first day of summer today, and it doesn't feel like it at all. But today, you are here because you are a multilingual, you are a professional, you are an expert in your field, and sometimes you may feel that you're not really given the opportunity to use the full spectrum of your talents and skills, or maybe you can, but you would like to go a little bit deeper. You'd like to understand a bit better about your superpowers as a multilingual. You would like to broaden your professional horizons and share with other fantastic multilingual professionals tonight. So wherever you are and whatever is your situation, you are welcome. You are at the right place. So a very, very big welcome to all of you in all the languages, not all of them, but just a few that I put on the screen. Thank you for joining us today. All right, so before introducing my special guest tonight, I'm going to quickly define what is multilingualism, because I think there is a lot of misunderstanding around what it is to be multilingual. And some people who are multilingual believe that they're not, because they can't speak the two languages or more at the same level. So what is bilingualism? It is the use of two or more languages on a regular basis. If you use more than one language on a regular basis, you are bilingual. Good news. Okay, so it does not mean that you can speak all your languages at the same level of expertise and fluency. And very often on a resume, you are invited to actually put the level of proficiency that you have in all your languages. So you can be very well a multilingual that has, native level in that language, expert level in that level, in that language, and maybe you are intermediate in another, and maybe you are beginner in another, and that's fine. You are still a multilingual. So to where you may have become a multilingual, maybe you grew up as a simultaneous bilingualism, and maybe when you grew up, your parents actually gave you the gift of multilingualism and raised you in two or more languages at once, at the same time. Or maybe you actually first learn a language and then you developed another, and then maybe another, and then maybe another. And this is what we call sequential bilingualism. Once again, both are bilingual. If you are born with one language, but you grew up and you decided to learn another, you are bilingual, even if your parents could not maybe give you this gift of bilingualism. If you grew up like this, well, great news, that was a little bit easier for you, but it is nothing better or nothing less one or the other. All right, so I just hope to clarify a little bit of a conception there to make sure that everybody feels comfortable about what it is to be bilingual, and that everybody feels comfortable that, yes, they are considered as bilingual tonight. All right, so where do I speak from? So my name is Lourdes. I'm a mother. I have multilingual children, and I'm now the mother of a blended family, and my stepchildren speak still another language as well. So it's a lot of fun to do all this. What I did, I have a bachelor in linguistics and then master's in teaching in a special language or a target language. And my thesis was actually multilingualism in children. So from that point of view, I developed a number of linguistic programs around the world, starting with Europe and then Asia, Pacific, Australia. I've been founding international college pre-K to year 12 that is multilingual. And of course, I'm the founder of Glossophia, multilingual education consultancies. I'm very, very pleased to see you tonight. If you have any question, you can see that the website is on the screen, as well as the email address if you need to have any question. Tonight, I'm really, really excited. We have a very special guest for this show tonight. It is a very special person. Her name is Eleanor, and I had the pleasure to work with Eleanor quite a few years back now. We worked together for a couple of years, and I've learned so much with Eleanor. I'm very, very pleased to welcome her tonight. So maybe she will open a video at some point to say hello. So Eleanor, as you can see on the screen, she can speak French and she can speak English. Eleanor is a sequential bilingual, if I remember properly, but you will correct me, Eleanor, if I'm wrong. I think she grew up
totally
English.
correct.
Yeah, very good. And then I think, Eleanor, you went on an exchange as a student in France. Is that right?
That is correct.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about how you learn a second language and what is French for you now as a second language for you?
Well, I mean, for me, my journey was pretty similar to a lot of people here in Australia, because we don't, I mean, we have a very multicultural society, but for white Australians like myself, it's not that common for us to speak other languages. I've always found language fascinating. Just the concept of using words to transfer meaning to another person and to mediate with another person in some way is so interesting to me. And I've always been super fascinated by this idea. I also had a general sort of belief that people should speak other languages, and that came from two places. One of them was my parents, who neither of whom speak other languages really, but try really hard. And the other place it came from was the refugee family who moved in next door to me when I was in about 5 or 6 years old. And they were actual proper real boat people who came from Vietnam. And we learned a little bit of Vietnamese over the years. We didn't really even realize we were doing it at the time. And our next door neighbours, we were open door neighbours. We spent huge amounts of time together, and really we taught them a lot of English. They taught us an awful lot about other ways of thinking and being. And, you know, everyone in my family cooks Vietnamese food because of it. So I had an assumption in my mind that I would speak another language because they did. And it seemed normal to me. What I didn't realize was that that wasn't actually going on around me with other people. So I took a holiday with my parents. It was a very big deal that they saved up for a long time. We went to France. For those of you out there who speak French, we were in the south. It was Easter. I was pretty impressed. The chocolate was incredible. Never heard of this idea of hot chocolate at breakfast time, but the family we stayed with, my dad's pen friend, the Romain family, actually made it every morning and had to explain to my parents that this was not special for us as children, because my parents thought they were doing it specially. No, this is what we have. So that's when I decided I was going to learn French. Nobody told me I couldn't. Nobody told me that it wasn't the standard thing for white Australians to really not be that excited by language learning. At the time, it was the late 80s, early 90s. You know, people weren't that keen on the idea. And very much in Australia, we were kind of coming culturally through a post-war sort of identity as a culture, as a nation and a cultural sort of group, and into a more modern identity. So we were very much focused on Australia at that time. And building kind of this new idea of Australia at that time, which is very multicultural for a start. So for me, I learned French by going to school and taking lessons and doing the subject at school for 5 years. And then, of course, I did my exchange, which Laure has already mentioned. And I stayed in a little town, well, not a town, sorry, a suburb, Soucy-en-Brie, which is outside of Paris, but it's on the train line there. So it's Greater Paris, essentially. And I discovered, of course, that I couldn't actually speak French at that point because French lessons were, I mean, they were fascinating. And what I didn't know about myself was that I'm a classic linguist. I find all languages equally fascinating. I find the concepts like culture, language and culture, and the link between them really interesting, and linguistic psychology, that sort of stuff. And so I lapped up my French lessons. I love them because French back in those days in the 90s in high school in Australia was like mini linguist, lots of grammar. There was an idea there that you really had to memorize grammar and you had to memorize conjugations and things like that. Very much that very old model of language learning that isn't really about going to the place. So I got there, discovered I actually couldn't really speak any French, was incredibly shy. I discovered that I was actually a bit terrified of actually speaking in front of real French people. That was quite scary.
I don't believe that, Eleanor. You shy, it's not like you.
I know. Actually, I have got an explanation. That's come just in the most recent years. But look, it was scary, and I have to stop and process and think. And I'm always going to have to stop and process and think in French. I just want to, so that was my basic learning. I went to uni, I did my degree in French. I finished off that and I did my master's in applied linguistics. And I did some general linguistics as part of that degree as well. And so, I picked up sort of, more and more and more. I didn't get really good though until I went back after uni and extended myself beyond the bachelor degree. And that was through Alliance Française, who, fantastic teachers, and they do great work.
That's true.
And I did several years with them, actually, just quietly, improving and improving. After uni, where I did wonderful subjects like intricate grammar of French, where we looked at, really, we actually looked at French from a couple of hundred years ago, that sort of thing, to Alliance Française, where we were actually, having conversations about what we thought about whether there should be women in the Navy, or we're reading stories, or, it was just, it was a good contrast, and it rounded out my education. So that was how I did it. Huge amount of just personal effort put in, huge amount of time put in. At the same time, for me, that works because the structure of that kind of learning works for me.
Absolutely. That's fascinating, Eleanor. And I can see in your story why today you have this incredible intercultural and multicultural understanding, and not just for yourself, but also you extend that understanding to others. And you're so good at building people who are culturally and linguistically diverse. You just build them up because you know what it is. And you have this awareness, you have this intuition, you have this compassion because you went through it and you know what it is to learn, the process, the culture, the grammar, like all these different blocks of language learning. You're very, very aware of it. So that makes you, of course, very, very supportive of others. And I think you always do that with a lot of joy, with a lot of humor. Always very, very great skills as well, just to share with others. So that's really exciting to have you there. And I will have lots of questions to ask you over this conference, because I know that you can bring so much to the discussion. So thank you very much. We're going to start by talking about the multilingual superpowers. And as I've just mentioned, Eleanor got superpowers by becoming bilingual, and it made her aware of all sorts of things, and cognitively as well. Very, very aware of this process. So multilingual superpowers, maybe you want to jump in the chat and start putting in the chat what you think are multilingual superpowers. If you are on Facebook, I might not see them at the same time. I do have Facebook with me, but it's a little bit difficult for me to see it. But if you are in the room, that's a little bit easier. So that's really cool. If you think of any superpower that multilingual people have, that will be really cool to share that, or even if you want to share later as well, if you're watching replay, that is fine as well. So first of all, the first thing is sometimes we think, well, if you are multilingual, it is going to give you some job opportunities, right? Because this is what we hear, that you can work for multinational companies, you can translate, you can teach languages, you can do all sorts of things. But it's not always related to languages. So sometimes being multilingual in already a job, just give you some career growth, give you more opportunities within the job that you already have, and that can also lead to a better income. So the studies show that 60% of people in the world are actually multilingual. We are the majority people. We are the majority multilinguals. But it is also shown through these studies that usually multilinguals have a higher income than monolingual people. This is a real benefit, obviously. And you may think of bilingualism as a benefit in terms of income, which is correct. It opens door to better networking opportunities as well, because you can speak in multiple languages. You can understand the cultures of these people as well. And culturally, we are different when we speak different languages. So it is important to be aware of that, as Eleanor mentioned a little bit earlier. Even if you don't speak Vietnamese or the language of your neighbors, that makes you culturally aware of where they come from, how they cook, how they play, how they interact with each other. At work, it is the same type of skills. You may network much better if you are multilingual, because you are using the skills to reach out to people who are different to you. Well, actually, there's a very good benefit of being multilingual. It's a great superpower. It gives you a greater cognitive flexibility, just because the connection in your brain actually kind of doubled. Each time you had an extra language, you had an extra level of cognition. So this skill is wonderful in the workplace, obviously, because it will really help you be multitasking. We always talk about, multitasking, blah, blah, blah. Well, multilinguals are better at that. It makes them more productive as well than others, and better at problem solving. So all these superpowers, maybe you were aware of it, or maybe you're just learning right now, oh, okay, I'm more productive as a multilingual than a monolingual. And maybe you were not really aware of it, but it is also quite a strong reality, and something that people in the workplace will notice. Even if they don't really know that you are multilingual, they will observe that you are more focused on your task, that you're better at problem solving, that you think outside of the box, because this is what multilingual have as special superpower. So if this is your case, any of this, you can put in the chat if you want, whether on Facebook or on YouTube or here on Zoom. What is your superpower as a multilingual? Because that is absolutely fascinating. But before we go any further, I want to ask you a question, okay? What type of career do you think require proficiency in multiple languages? Let's talk about cliche. What type of career do you think require proficiency in multiple languages? What do you think? Put in the chat. If you put it on Facebook, I'll try to have a look at what you're writing. I'm not sure I can see the comments actually. Or if you put it on the Zoom chat, what is it? Maybe you think, I don't know. Eleanor, do you have a clue what type of career require proficiency in multiple languages?
Well, I feel like this is a game of QI, Laure, because I want to say languages teachers and stuff like that, but really, based on my recent experience of actually no longer being a languages teacher, I really want to say it's all of them. Actually, no, they don't all require it, but they do all, you do benefit enormously. And I am starting to see us, even here in Queensland, where we aren't always bilingual, I'm starting to see more and more jobs actually request it.
That is a very good answer, actually, and this is exactly the answer I was willing to share with you, because usually the cliche is, yes, language teachers and translators, maybe flight attendants. We're thinking a little bit outside of the box, or hospitality, tourism workers. Yeah, these people need to speak different languages. But actually, all languages can benefit from being multilingual. Even if speaking multiple languages is not part of the everyday work, the soft skills that go with being multilingual is definitely important. So I can see here, we have some comments, and I can see nutrients benefit from being multilingual. That is a great, I love it. I this answer because yes, music is a form of language, isn't it? So definitely being multilingual is great in the brain as well. I have journalists, very good analysis for a journalist to be a bilingual. Diplomat, yes, we think about diplomat quite often. Sorry. And I can read here as well, any job involving human interaction can benefit from being multilingual. That's a great answer. I'm very pleased to read it because yes, as soon as you interact with others, being multilingual gives you more empathy towards others. And definitely being multilingual will definitely be beneficial for you and for the others, as I'm saying. I did benefit from Eleanor being multilingual when I worked with her and me being multilingual. I think she got me there as well, very well. So Eleanor, I'm going to ask you directly, actually, what are your superpowers? So tell us a little bit about what you do and why being multilingual is a superpower for you in your work today, in your career.
So I've got a few. The first one I want to really highlight is the flexible thinking. So I recently found out that I'm autistic, and of course that means part of being autistic is struggling with change. And I can definitely remember some times, like when I was in the school musical as a teenager and they changed the dance steps and I melted down. I could not cope. For me, I actually have a fairly wide range of flexibility that I can exercise, particularly when I'm at work. And that's really, partly that's actually come from the lessons that I've learned from being a language student. I have learnt more than French, but not a lot. I did a year of Spanish at uni. I did some Indonesian. I did some German. But I'm not in any way proficient in any of those languages. And I guess, you know, it really came together recently for me. I'm in a job now where I'm not actually using my French every day, which is something I'll talk about later, is how I manage that, because being an Aussie, being Caucasian, not having close, easy access to French-speaking places, that's an issue. So we'll get into that like when we talk challenges later on down the track. But I've been working for the Department of Education for Queensland here in Australia, and I have the absolutely wonderful job of getting to design teacher training that goes online. So it's extremely cool. And a project came my way called We All Belong. It is an online suite that is all about inclusivity, and it has 8 different sections, and each one of those sections is about a different type of inclusivity. So we wrote about being a gay or lesbian, trans, intersex, queer person in a workplace, as well, in a workplace. We wrote about disability. We also wrote about culture. And the challenge we were given, and it was called Many Cultures, and it's all about staff in our huge, you know, we've got 100,000 odd staff in the Department of Education, and it's about the multicultural staff we have. And it's about how we all become more aware. And I'd given myself the task, because I thought of it, every one of these little sections had to have some actions that teachers could do that other people in the department, didn't matter whether they were a boss or a leader or not, everyone could do. And the question was, what is it you do? And the first thing we always say, and Laura will know this, everyone knows this, we say you don't have to know all the ins and outs of all the cultures of the world. No one can do that. We don't want to learn culture like it's a set of rules. You say this, you don't say this, you don't do this. You know, it's not like that. No one can do that, and especially not when you live in a multicultural, globalized world like we do. It's never going to happen. And that, I had a moment, because, you know, I'd found myself on this project and was trying to write it specifically for education people. So there was really no one else around who could give a lot for it. And I realized that the answer is flexible thinking. It's asking yourself the question, could this be something else? Or I wonder, and an end sentence, however, you know, when somebody does something in front of me or says something in front of me and it's unusual, or it might be culturally really different and totally miles away from where I'm at, instead of thinking that's wrong or that's weird, my first thought is always, could this be? I wonder, is this part of this person's culture? And I've actually been doing this for a very, very long time, really since I was a kid. You know, I didn't really speak a lot of Vietnamese with my neighbours, but they had a huge intercultural influence on me. And so when somebody does something, I don't have that initial reaction of that's strange or that's wrong, but just, oh, this is different. This is not what I was expecting. And maybe it's something else. And to do that requires a certain amount of flexible thinking and flexibility in the brain. You know, you can't being able to recognize that your way is not the only way. It's just one way is a really big one. You know, it's a really important thing. So I will say that that's one of our really big superpowers, and it's probably highly underestimated by a lot of us. It's something that we should be shouting over and over again, is that our brains open us to possibilities. And that means that we are the sort of people who, in our employment, in our personal lives, wherever we go, who do the creative stuff, who move the mountains, you know, who do all the interesting things. That's what that does for us. So I think big superpower there is the flexible thinking that we get. And as somebody who actually has a neurodiversity there that really actually, you know, can cause barriers with flexible thinking, I want to do some study on this now, because I feel like this is the way forward for people who struggle with flexible thinking, and autism is one reason for that, but there are others as well. Language learning gives us, and you know, cultural experiences give us so much in that respect, and really do put us a little bit ahead of the curve, because we are open to the possibility of difference.
Absolutely. I think this is wonderful what you're sharing, Eleanor, and thank you so much for being open about like really a real aspect of yourself and what you learn about yourself, because this is something so true. And maybe I will just bounce back and give a personal anecdote on that as well, because I've been the head of for bilingual school, and I've been enrolling all sorts of children. Some children had you know, autism, or some children were struggling with ADHD as well. But I remember in particular one little boy that came to our school, I think it was grade 1 type of age. But I could see already during the enrollment interview that something was slightly different about that child. And as we investigated quite quickly, because all the teachers were alerted, we realized that the child had severe delay, very, very strong impairment, intellectual impairment for that child. And basically with such an impairment, this child should have been completely unable to learn how to read, even in a language. And being in a bilingual class, he learned how to read not only English, but in French as well. And that was a wonderful success. I was so, so proud to see that after a semester. And of course, he was behind. He was not reading at the same level as his age group, but he was able to read in both languages. And for me, I was like, yeah, that's, you know, that's wonderful. This is what we do, right? And multilingualism is definitely a way forward. It pushes people forward, and he really trespasses boundaries of, you know, disabilities or learning difficulties and everything. And that is a wonderful gift to have as a child, and later on as an adult, definitely. At this stage, if you have any question or any comments, like if you want to share maybe a personal anecdote as well, if being multilingual, growing up multilingual, or developing bilingualism later in life helped you maybe to overcome something like this, maybe you want to share with us, you want to put a word about it, or maybe you have a question as well to Eleanor or to myself about you know, this actual intellectual support that is multilingualism, the flexible thinking, the creativity, all these sort of things. Feel free to ask any question. I cannot really see my Facebook screen, but if this is the case and you're asking a question on Facebook, I will make sure that I will get back to you as soon as possible. So this is all fantastic, you know, to be multilingual. And we're going to talk, and I'm sure that Eleanor will have a lot of things to say about that as well, how to be recognized and valued as a as a multilingual professional, and not just as a translator or language teacher, because we make the points now that it's fantastic for all sorts of work career. So what, there's plenty of things that we can do to feel recognized. And I think Eleanor started to talk a little bit about it, about what's put in place in her workplace. But maybe, Eleanor, you want to share more about practically how do we actually recognize, value, push up this multilingual in the workplace?
This is a really tough one. Because I grew up in a space where the people around me didn't speak other languages and didn't actually value that stuff. I mean, I have experienced times where people have said things like, oh, what a shame that you're not a general teacher and you can't teach all the subjects because, then we could use you so much more. And I think, no, what a benefit that you have someone who is so good at all of these other things teaching language, like other way around people. So, I mean, I'm very, very passionate about this stuff. I've also seen the effect it's had on me as an individual in my family and in my work, and how it changed, it's changed the way that I think. And it apart from opening my mind to other possibilities, it's also given me a whole lot of extra tools and strategies, because we constantly are communicating. And we're constantly trying to transfer information. And that's an educational concept. It's a really big one, but it's something we're doing all the time as people, as human beings. And somebody mentioned it in a comment, interaction. Every time we interact, and we interact with people, we interact with, like TV shows and movies, and we interact with news reports and Facebook feeds and everything we see and everything we do. And so when you do something like have that extra understanding of language, because most of us as bilinguals or multilinguals, even if we are not sequential, even if we are those who grow up with both languages together, we still have good knowledge of these languages because we tend to nurture it quite well. It just means that we have these tools, these extra tools. What we aren't as good at as multilinguals, I think, and this is just my opinion, by the way, I've literally not looked up this at all. I have not done any reading, but I don't know that we always communicate our value well. And one of the issues there is that we're dealing with people who genuinely have no idea what we're talking about. When I have to go in and talk to a school principal about why we should do a language, I understand that for the most part, I'm going to talk to someone who doesn't know what it is to be multilingual, who have no idea what their life could have been. And we can't sit around all the time thinking about what could have been or expecting them to. That's not going to happen. So it means it ends up falling back on us to do the hard work, to get other people to understand our value and be able to recognize that value. And one of the ways we do that, of course, is we communicate the value really, really effectively. We make those links and those connections between the practices that we do in our workplace that maybe have nothing to do with language and our language learning. So like when in the job I do, I have to produce videos and write subtitles and things like that. And that means actually being able to interpret what people are saying really effectively. And most of the time that's not too difficult, but every now and then I get somebody like a person with a disability that affects their speech, that sort of thing. And I just, and because I have spent so long deciphering language, I find that job, I do it better and more easily than the people around me. So there are all these little things, and that's just a tiny, minute little detail, little things that I'm doing in my job that actually the reason I'm good at them is because I spent this time speaking this other language, learning this other language, and mediating and between different cultures. And of course, when you learn a world language, that's a lot of cultures to really start to work with. And it means that you just widen and widen your own horizons. So I guess one of the problems is we tend to go with talking about things like widening horizons, but we don't always give good concrete examples and good explanations of what we're doing. And when somebody has literally no idea what it means to be bilingual and has no idea that their life could have even been different, it does fall back onto us to do the hard yards and to do that work. So I think one of the things that we need to do to make sure we are recognised and valued. And I understand there are lots of places in the world where this is not a huge deal, but there are places where it is, where we really struggle to get people to see what we have as being a benefit. One of the ways we do that is by educating others. And we do that because we're talking about other adults, we're talking about people who don't necessarily realize they're being educated. We do that by doing really great practices and then actually just telling them really clearly, this is what we do, making the connections for them, because they're not going to make those connections themselves. They have no idea.
That is very true, and I can see some applaud going on in the audience.
Oh, really?
Because, yes, this is very, very true. Indeed. There was a very good comment as well as you were talking. So thank you for this comment. Someone is saying being multilingual is also part of our personal identity, but then not always understood by others. And that is very, very true. As well. Absolutely. I remember talking to a principal, and I was the head of the bilingual school at this stage, and this principal, this Australian principal, just telling me really as seriously as she could, why don't you use Google Translate? That's enough.
Sorry, Law. I mean, it's one of the things we do as language teachers actually is teach children how to use Google Translate, because it's not that simple. But that's the whole thing. If it was that simple, we wouldn't be fighting wars in the world and stuff the way we are. Like there's, like it's just not. And actually, we're a long way away from having it be that good. That said, it is a great resource. It's great to use.
Of course.
But in the same way, kids don't know how to just use a dictionary without us teaching. We have to teach this one too.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're right. So yes, clarifying, I think, expectations, as you said, is something really important, because there could be so many misunderstandings that can be linked to cultural or to like the workplace is different from a country to another. So there's expectations that are different. So being very like having a lot of clarification around the role, the job, the structure as well, like how does the business operate, making sure that everybody knows the expectations, how to address people, what type of language to use in writing, verbally, all these sort of things is important to be very, very clear and recognize all multilingual as well, because they do bring value to a workplace and we don't always really realize, but what do they bring? And letting them say, well, I bring this, I bring that. I remember we had the best morning teas when we were working at C2C, Eleanor, in our floor there, because it was all the languages bringing morning teas from different cultures and different countries. That was the best in the whole building. But we can think about professional development as well, and developing leaders in understanding the multiculturalism and the multilingualism of the staff is something that is really, really priceless as well. Some leaders want to learn and they just don't know, like they genuinely don't know. It's not that they are malevolent, it's just that they don't understand. And sometimes they're really willing if we explain to them what it is to understand, but sometimes they're not willing to. And that's also important to recognize, okay, well, I'm not trying again, and making sure that, we're not getting in trouble. So talking about that, we're going to talk about the specific challenges of multilingual professionals, because there are a number of challenges as well. And we can think of the pressure, because when we are multilingual, we may not speak that well the language of the workplace, and sometimes we want to be perfect because we don't want to be singled out, and that creates a lot of pressure because we actually maybe could appear less professional because we don't use the right words, because we don't use the right grammar, because we don't address the people the proper way. And there's a lot of mistakes that we can make that are just cultural mistakes, but that could be seen as, oh, this is really not professional. And that can create a little bit of a low esteem sometimes for all multilingual, thinking, oh, I don't really know the codes of the workplace around me, and people don't seem to appreciate my work, or I don't really understand what is expected of me. So that creates a lot of miscommunication around or multilingual sometimes, because they don't know even something as speech turn. Like in France, we tend to speak on top of each other. Like we never wait for someone to finish their sentence. We start another sentence straight away. and someone who's from a culture where we wait until the person has finished before you start speaking, that will really put them off, and they were like, oh, they will not dare saying a word. They were like, people are very rude here. So miscommunication can happen so easily. Sometimes even that is not verbal. Sometimes it's just body language. We do use a body language differently from a culture to another, from a language to another. And that could also be misinterpreted, and that can be something to the detriment of the multilingual worker. And sometimes it does create some personal inhibition. People are like, oh, I'm so concerned that I will be poorly seen. Maybe I will make a fool of myself. I'm not quite sure. And then become less and less confident in the workplace and tend to withdraw themselves. And this is something that I've seen. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm not saying anything because I may say something that is not going to be good. Maybe people would not understand what I say. Maybe people will make fun of my accent, and I will not dare say a word in a meeting because I'm not feeling comfortable enough. So that is something that is definitely a challenge that multilingual may experience. Sometimes, unfortunately, we do face as multilingual ethnical biases or racism, let's call it as it is as well. And that could be, you know, racism against, you know, any color of skins, any cultures, any languages, any accents, but it's something that you can definitely face so much as a multilingual at times, depending on your workplace. Some places are more open, some are a little bit less, you know, open-minded about that situation. This is definitely something to work together on to improve in our workplaces and trying to fight against these biases, because they can be very detrimental. Cultural expectations, as I say, you know, coffee breaks in France is part of the expected day, and it can take forever. Like, it can take a very long time. French people will gather around the coffee machine and chat for 15 minutes without any issue at all. If you try to do that in Australia or other country, people will find that you're very lazy, like you're not working. How come you're not eating your lunch in front of your screen? Like, you're such a lazy person. I can see a thumb up here as well, because this is sometimes some expectation that we have, even in terms of time work, toilet break, coffee breaks, etc., that is very different from a place to another, and that can be difficult sometimes to adjust to that. Professional norms as well. Even if you're doing the same profession in your original language and then to the language of the country that you are living in, you will find that the professional norms are very different, and you don't do the same job from a place to another. If we're talking about language teachers, you're thinking, well, if you're teaching Italian, surely you will teach Italian the same way in Spain than in Australia. Well, there's nothing more wrong than that. And Eleanor, I'm sure you've experienced it. I've experienced it. I'm sure other people in the room have experienced that as well, that from like the same job, but from a country to another will be very, very different in terms of standards and norms and expectation. And sometimes as a multilingual, you are so much outside of the box that you feel that nobody knows how to trade with you, and you're a bit weird. You're like, okay, this is this weird person. They think really outside of the box. They can't follow the process that we're following. They are very creative. Sometimes people can't follow. And I remember having someone one day asking me, you're a little bit fast thinking. How do you deal with us slow thinkers? And I was like, okay, I have nothing against you, but obviously you have something against me here. So this is a reality that our multilingual may face in their workplace, not all the time, because, you know, we don't want to say this is all very negative, but this is a real thing that our multilingual may be facing. So if there is anything that jumps at you that you want to share here, or you have any questions about these challenges, that's a good time to jump in the chat as well. what are some of the challenges that you face as a multilingual? Maybe you want a solution. You're like, okay, well, this is the challenges I'm facing, but I'm really keen to actually overcome that. I'm really keen to find solution. I'm really keen to communicate about it to my team. It's just I'm not sure how to tell them to help me, help me to help you, you know, some sort of things. So if you have any questions, that is a good time. Eleanor, I'm sure that you have lots to share about that as well. So as people are writing the question, maybe you can also start telling us what are the challenges that you identify for multilinguals, and what are maybe your strategy or strategies, maybe you have more than one, to overcome and help others to overcome these challenges as well.
So I've got two points I thought I'd talk about for this one. There are lots of challenges out there, and we talked a bit about things like being valued by others and that sort of thing. And we all know that constant struggle for those of us who are here in Australia. But I thought I'd talk about two things. One is something that I've sort of thought about. The other one is something that I keep seeing over and over again throughout my career for many different companies and all of that. But recruitment and leadership. Let's talk about these. So here in Australia, if you want to get a job, you write, and you want to get a job that's a bit of a thinky job because you're bilingual, so you're probably going to have to write a thing called a selection criteria response. And a selection criteria response is where you answer sort of like interview questions. And it's kind of like a little snapshot like you would be doing in an interview, but before you do an interview, so that they can decide whether or not they want to see you there. Not every country does this. In fact, most do not. They do other things. And I have noticed over time, and it's not because anybody kind of intended to do so, but people who have different language backgrounds are more likely to write that selection criteria response in a way that's not conventional. And it may be that it comes out more like a cover letter, which is common because people around the world do use cover letters, but sometimes it's not even that. And particularly for government in Australia, which I've done a lot of work for, if you can't write that document, you're not going to get an interview. Yeah, that's the way it works. Law is nodding because she knows exactly what I mean. Now, for some countries, they just do interviews. Some countries have resume and job application processes that are kind of the same for everyone, no matter where you are. So it's pretty generic across the board. And then they use the interview process to figure out who they really want or who they don't. For some places, you write things like cover letters or you do presentations, and there are places where that happens. And in other places, it's all about the personal touch, and you've got to go there and talk to someone and show your face, to really get anywhere. If you don't know this to start with, it's pretty hard to get a job. And furthermore, even if you do know, if that selection criteria isn't conventional here in Australia, you're unlikely to progress. And that means you've got to master a piece of formal writing. And formal writing is one of the really tough things to do in another language. Lots of people who are multilingual actually don't have formal writing skills in all of the languages they speak. That's really common because it's not actually used that often. So we end up, of course, with this phenomenon where people who have qualifications and experience in amazing things are doing not amazing things in their work because of the recruitment process. And leadership is the same, because it's a recruitment process of itself. I don't see enough around me of people who are from other cultures in leadership positions. Very often. The team I'm in right now for the Department of Education here, we actually do. There are two of us who are white Australians who speak other languages. We have two others who have actually grown up in other cultures on our little team of about 12. And that's a pretty big deal because we're writing for a living. And we have, of course, obviously we have supportive people in our leadership who understand all of this and who can see the benefit of this. But lots of places where I've been at work, that's not the case. Where I do notice in the leadership, there's a lot in common between everyone there. And it's a cognitive bias thing. We don't mean to, but we feel drawn to. We feel like we understand people who look like us and talk like us better. And then we recruit them and we hire them because it feels right. And there's nothing actually kind of wrong with that on the outside. But when we start to dig a bit deeper, what we start to realize is we're actually experiencing big big bias, and it is an ethnic bias, and it is racism, and it's something we're not even necessarily aware we're doing. But when we start going around and looking at teams of people who in workplaces, and you start seeing how similar everybody is in some, you can see where this is occurring. So recruitment leadership, huge challenge for us. And unfortunately, the answer at the moment is we have to play the game. We have to do the heavy work, the heavy lifting. You know, we have to be the ones who figure out how to use and operate within that system. The good news is we're multilinguals. We know how to do that. We've done it before. We know how to learn how to operate in a system that's not our own. And we can do that through language because we've done it in language. We can do it through culture because we've done that too. You know, so yes, it's a challenge, and the answer to it and the solution is not a fun one, because it's not one where we get to, you know, implement societal change and see the world become a better place, which is, you know, what we want. But it is something we can do if we want to, if we support each other, if we reach out to each other and we help each other and band together to understand these things and be able to do this stuff. The other one is something I like to call binary oppositions. Now, I studied literature in a former life. That's how I started out, literature and French at uni. And one of the things we talk about in literature is a concept called the binary opposition. And a binary opposition in literature is essentially where you take two opposing ideas and you do interesting things with them in your literature. So you might juxtapose light and dark as a concept. Or you might want to, and you do that for effect and drama in the story. I can't have this idea that this happens in our lives too, and it has all the same dramatic effect as it does in literature. So we have all these concepts where we're almost at a point of direct opposition in terms of how we manage them. And when I was working with a range of different languages teams a few years ago, and this is when I first met Law, I discovered this idea that, like, all the concepts are there. We have a concept of gratefulness. We have the concept of harmony. We have the concept of cooking. We have the concept of being. We have all of these concepts, but we don't actually live those concepts or experience those concepts the same way. And every now and then we come across a culture where they do it. And I call it binary opposition, same concept, but we do it totally differently. And we create this binary where there's suddenly this feeling of us and them. And when that concept is being played out so differently to what we're used to, it can really easily feel like it might be wrong, weird, strange, bad, rude. That's a big one, not polite. So I worked with two teams, a team of Japanese people and a team of French people. By the way, Laure, this was not your team of French people that I'm referring to. I'm just going to put that out there. It was actually the team before you. I'm just going to put that out there. This was the team before you. So in France, harmony, traditionally, French people, debate very much comes from the Greek tradition of debate and democracy and your Roman traditions, and they demonstrate intellect through debate. Having an opinion and being able to, like, substantiate that opinion and you know, beat someone in an argument is a really well-respected thing in French culture, and people will do it. They'll be sitting at coffee. This is why it takes so long, and they'll argue about the world and everything, and this is just life. The Japanese experience harmony a whole nother way, and I can't tell you quite as much about it because I don't know as much about it, but they do experience disharmony, they experience disagreement, but they demonstrate it very, very differently. One of the ways they demonstrate it is by reluctantly agreeing. You pause and then you agree, because that shows that you disagree, but you're not going to rock the boat. You're going to have harmony. Both of these ways of achieving harmony are great. There is nothing wrong with them. They both work, but they're so different. The Japanese team thought the French team were rude, and the French team thought the Japanese team might have been lacking a tiny bit in intelligence and weren't quite sure why they were there. And it took a really long time. But basically, they got to know each other personally, and that changed. But that was their initial reaction to each other. And in the end, they all achieved the same thing. They had harmonious teams. They got great work done. But they did it so differently. And I bet everyone can think of what I mean when I say this binary opposition, same concept, but it's so different that it's totally challenging. And, there are some things where I'm still struggle to get my head around. I really struggle with things like Chinese traditional medicine and the use of animals. Like, that really gets to me. And when I was working with law, that was something I was actually doing with a team of Chinese speakers at the time. I really struggled. I really have trouble getting my head around the idea that that's okay. But there's a lot of people out there who swear by, their powdered rhino horn, or their, tiger like spleen, and all kinds of interesting different things that they use these animals for healing. And I still struggle with this one, and I still find it hard not to be judgmental about this, because it is so oppositional to the environment that I grew up in, which was very, very pro-environment. Australia's all about, conserving. We don't always do it well, but we think that it's important. So yeah, that's my little bit of philosophy about languages, is that the binary oppositions kick us down a little bit at times, and that's the day-to-day challenge, the everyday challenge, that we come across all the time.
Absolutely.
Oh, and it's not always other people from other languages backgrounds too, of course. Culture is culture, and we have many cultures in our country, not just different country cultures, but subcultures, and yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you touched to values as well, personal values.
Oh, yeah.
And, how we perceive other people's value as well. So definitely you can clash sometimes. It's not that you don't want to be open to someone else, but it's just that you really can't wrap your head around it as well. And that is a real challenge, obviously. So maybe you are experiencing these challenges in your profession. Maybe you are experiencing that right now, or maybe it's something that you experience and you managed to overcome. But let's talk a little bit about how to overcome these challenges, of course. And I found this picture that I thought was awesome. I think it's a great reflection of what we can do, because on the picture, and maybe you don't understand all these languages, so I'm just going to say that in Italian they say we speak French, and in French they say they speak German, in German they say they speak English, and in English, of course, you can read, they say we speak Italian. And I think, of course, what would I write in French? We speak French. Well, I can understand that. What other languages can you speak, right? So I think this is really good. And there's not one size fits all solution when it, like in terms of multilingualism, because as Eleanor described, she was working the same workplace, two group of people coming from two different nations and very different reactions, and trying to figure out a way to make these people work together. Definitely, you have to be creative. You have to think out of the box and trying to find different ways. So obviously you need to find a solution that works for you, for your workplace, and that's not going to be exactly the same solution as other people. But being targeted, being intentional, being purposeful in what you do definitely is going to help you, whatever you decide to do. But if you're purposeful about it, if you are open about it, and you want to put that on the table and say, okay, look, there's something culturally here, there's something here about the language that creates some miscommunication, that creates some biases, that creates some prejudice, maybe. Let's talk about it. What can we do to actually build us better all together, not just you against me or them against, us. It's really avoiding the blanket solution, but trying to find something that is going to work for everybody without going in the communitarism and the individual solution as well, because you can't do that in a workplace. That is not realistic. You have a team of people that need to work together, and you can't say, well, this worker here, he speaks that language, is going to work his own way. That is not realistic as well. But having some little bit of a cultural awareness training can be really useful as well. And as Eleanor described, okay, for French people, debating is part of the culture. This is what they enjoy. This is the traits that you represent. For Japanese culture, this is a very different way to demonstrate. So being aware of that will help people understand, oh, okay, they're not rude. Oh, they're not shy. Oh, they're not this or they're not that. And that will definitely help the communication to really have this awareness about each other in our workplace. Sometimes having just basic language training as well, because yes, okay, we are currently in Australia. Not everybody here is in Australia. Some people are joining us from other countries. But, you know, sometimes you do speak the language of the country that you live in, but you haven't learned it in a specific way. You haven't learned the, you know, the special lingual of that workplace. So having some language training just to say, okay, what is the language of answering an email? You know, that's the basics, but it can be so powerful. It can be so useful. It can help the multilingual to feel, oh, okay, I felt so stupid. I didn't dare asking the question because I felt like I was so uneducated. I learned the language. I maybe have a very high command of this language, but I don't know the specific of that industry maybe. So just basic language classes sometimes can just be very efficient, very targeted, being open about cultural differences as well, and inviting them sometimes. As I say, morning tea, everybody brings something from their countries and their culture. It's going to be really enjoyable for everybody, obviously, and I'm going to help, you know, break the ice between people, because food is a way that everybody relates, and that's a great way to put people around the table and enjoy each other. And sometimes you'll have to accept that you'll have to simplify some things, and you know, you're thinking all these big words and you know, a lot of things like this. Sometimes you're like, okay, can I make it a little bit simpler so it will be a bit more accessible for everybody? Can create, you know, some help against language barrier as well. So all these simple things that can be implemented, but for our multilingual in the workplace as well, to be open about it, and to find a manager or someone in the workplace that they feel confident that they can approach and tell them, look, I'm not feeling very comfortable with this. I'm struggling with that. Is there a way that you can help me? What can I do to understand this better or to communicate better as well? That can be sometimes using visuals as well to help as well understand a little bit better. Something that is really important though, and I think that really is across all the line, is to remember to be respectful, because sometimes we are facing with cultures that have very different values, of what we perceive as very different values to ours, and we may feel a little bit judgmental against them because it really hurts our own value, and we're like, wow, this is really in opposition to what I believe in. And that is a reality as well, but trying to be respectful. And okay, maybe we don't really understand why they do a thing this way or that way, but still, okay, well, that is their value. That's not my values, but, you know, trying to still be respectful of this is, of course, very important. Be inclusive. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. Eleanor did a lot of work on inclusivity. They actually got an award for that, if I understood properly, Eleanor. But respect and inclusivity is definitely a way forward to help multilingual to overcome some of the challenges that they may face. So hopefully that would have given you some ideas and some options. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask any questions. If you are watching in replay, you can send an email, and I make sure that, you know, we send you an answer to your question as well if you're not on live today. But that was really good, I think, to hear the point of view of our sequential bilingual today. Did a lot of work in terms of inclusivity and language with different professionals and everything. So if you have any questions for her, if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask your question. Just keeping the chat open a little while. And if you don't have any, yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
There's just something I absolutely have to say. First of all, I agree with you in every part. You know, with our big team of all the different people from different language backgrounds, when we come together and we actually took the time to get to know each other, and you might not think you have the time, but put the time in, because when you get to know someone as a human first and as a speaker of another language second, it changes things. I agree. But what I actually really wanted to say is that one of my teachers is here.
Okay.
Yes. So I'd just like to say hello to Lester Ford.
Very
who
good.
taught me at uni a million years ago in another time. And he probably doesn't even remember me, but I was in his French class in like 2004 or something like that. It was a long time ago.
I remember.
Oh, you do remember me? I was a bit out there, wasn't I?
You weren't the first.
No, and I bet I wasn't the last either, Lester.
That's right.
but now I know with my autism, I know why I think so differently about these things. So it's kind of good. I studied with Lester at UQ when I was doing my bachelor degree. Lester, I teach the Master of Teaching at USQ these days. I went and got my master's from UQ. I worked with Noriko Iwashita, who's just amazing, a brilliant teacher. And and I work for USQ for some of their stuff every now and then, as well as Department of Education. I'm still with them. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Lester, is there anything that you want to say as the teacher of Eleanor? Is there anything that you want to say about her journey from your class to where she's up to now in terms of multilingualism? Is there anything that you want to add to that, Lester?
Well, my memory is not that good. I certainly remember her, and years later, some things that she was involved in. What I would say, because I still do teacher. I mean, I've given up full-time school and QCAA and so on. So I'm doing teacher education at UQ and also online for Australian Catholic Uni. And we have a number of international students. And quite often, so you've got a format, an Australian format with assignments and those sort of things. Quite often there is I guess it's a misunderstanding or not quite getting what is expected, because students have a different cultural background. Sometimes it's the language, and there is a thing that it's given in the rubric that you have to use about it's sometimes their English is not quite correct. Usually I can understand what they mean, but sometimes even I can't understand. I think I can understand from a language perspective what they're trying to do, but somebody else who is moderating, who comes from a different subject area, hang on, that's not quite right. And also I notice with certain language backgrounds, there seems to be an overemphasis. Oh, I have to teach the culture. Hang on, let's back off a bit. You're doing a language course. You can't teach language without understanding culture. It's part of it, but you're not teaching a social science. It's not a social studies course where it's about culture. It's about language, which is totally mixed up with understanding of culture. To understand what expectations are, what things you've mentioned, use of language, but then understanding the requirements, because everything of ours is presented in English. And some of it is quite formal when it's university documents and so on. And particularly if in one of the unis, things are quite generic, you have to do it this way, and it's this generic base for all subjects. And I'm saying, but you don't learn a language the same way you would learn science or English or history. We have to change certain things, and that isn't always understood. And it might sound inappropriate. My current swear word, if you like, is monolinguals. You just don't understand. That's
I agree.
I agree. And monolinguals who are in administration and above you,
they have no idea. They have no idea what their world could actually be.
Principals, deputies, and so on, who most have never learned a language, or certainly not to any extent of being able to use it, and still have this idea that the way you teach, or is the way they were taught. Well, they can't use the language, so something went wrong there.
And we do not teach like that anymore. You know, our current curriculum is quite groundbreaking, and it's totally designed for our culture and our context in Australia. And I mean, it's not perfect, never will be, but
especially senior.
yeah,
Naughty me for saying that.
No, I get you. I get you. I finished up in primary teaching, believe it or not. I taught high school for a long time, then primary.
Yeah.
So adorable, so gorgeous. You barely have to teach. You just do stuff in the language when they're in prep, and it's amazing. But when you are talking to leadership in a school, no, they just don't know. And we have pedagogical underpinning kind of styling for all of our subjects that demonstrates the difference. Inquiry in the social sciences, intercultural learning in the languages, and so on and so forth. So we are seeing that there are different pedagogical approaches, which means you have to teach differently, because pedagogy is the how. And yet we still have this issue with languages that we haven't quite gotten on board with as a group, as a whole education, society, that languages are just like teaching maths or English or the worst, of course, the humanities and social sciences, when our languages lessons become culture lessons, which of course we know is
and there's a focus in tertiary certainly on, they're pushing direct instruction.
Oh, yes.
Students will then
it doesn't work in languages.
but define direct instruction, because the syllabus, which is a boring dry document, just lists the grammar that has to be covered. When you get a sort of a young, inexperienced teacher or still a student doing their studies, direct instruction, I say, hang on, direct instruction is all the things you do with comprehensible input, where it's all about listening, comprehending first. The strategies you are using, that is direct instruction. No one, other people won't recognize it as such, but don't be put off by this title, this sort of generic education thing, that direct instruction means here's your grammar. No, it's a different way of doing it, which starts with the very natural way, as our little kids learn growing up, they understand, and then they start using it, and then you bring it, and it's what they now call pop-up grammar. Do a bit of grammar when it's needed. And yes, you could be using
it's got a name.
It has a name.
That's good. I used to call it reflective grammar, Lester, because it'd be like, now that we've done it, we're going to reflect. And I'd go, that thing we were doing, here's what we call it. And here's what you were doing. And for me, it's the only way to be bothered teaching grammar. They never remember it unless you do, because readiness, you've got to do it at the right moment.
Yes, and context.
Yes.
They can be using past tenses without even realizing it, simply because they're following a model.
That's right,
exactly. So used to doing it.
Yes.
And then when you get to the stage of, you actually need to say, like in a gendered language, like Latin languages, German and so on, where you need to say you in the plural are doing it. Well, you need another form of the verb. You're so used to saying, I do this, you or she.
Yes.
But it makes life interesting. It's still got me going.
Well, Lester, we definitely need you to keep teaching, the future teachers of tomorrow. Definitely. And I think I sent you a message because my daughter remembers you. You may not remember her.
Yes, I do. Yes.
But
when I finished full time, I went and did 20 months of part-time, 6 months for year 8, but then I had a semester of year 3, which was wonderful, never taught year 3. And then I had a year of 5s and 6s.
Yeah, I think she was in grade 6 when you had her. So that would be that
2018. And in the meantime, I'd picked up lecturing at ACU, and I thought, I'm back working full time, and this wasn't the plan.
Of course, because you're passionate, like we are all. I think once you're passionate, it's like you never work a day of your life.
We just can't help ourselves.
Yes, that's great. That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing your passion with all of you. Just wondering if Shannon, you have a question, because I could see you kind of see you behind your screen. So if you have any question or comment, maybe, so just for the record as well, Shannon is a former student of mine. It would have been in 2009 or 10, so quite some time ago. So what is your take? So when we first started, Shannon, you couldn't speak a word of French when you arrived in my class. And
Yeah,
went on to learn French, take your baccalaureate in science. And I think you're now doing your PhD.
yeah, as always, I moved a lot. Yeah, again, since we met, I was on very low level of French, very just basic conversation. Then I went through all the plural grammar and spelling learning process was tough but useful. Yeah, and I went to university in France. Then after my master's degree, I decided to continue my PhD studies in Canada in the English speaking area to improve my English, because only at that time I realized I need to learn English, and I really truly found the motivation and passion to learn, because before I was like every other French student, the English class is just for passing grade and not really for learning.
Mhm.
And since then, I well, currently I'm in France, just visiting families. But during my PhD years, I'm still on it. I speak and write on English on a daily basis. And yeah, just quickly bouncing back to one of your question, like I'm living in Alberta, so Alberta, Canada is quite conservative, and it's English speaking province. Somewhat, I've seen some resistance from local people to speak French, and resistant to French road signs, and but I think that kind of challenge is only local. But overall, well, back then I only speak Mandarin and a form of local dialect. Now I speak French and being proficient in English, and also I'm open my interest in many other languages. It's funny because more language you know, more perspective you got, and you can learn different point of view from different population cultures, and sometimes some barrier that you considered before they're broken down, and you found more and more connections between French and Spanish, French and Farsi, Russian, Ukrainian, and Greek, and it's amazing to explore those things the further you go in the learning process. So I found that's amazing being multilingual. Although, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your testimony. That was not planned at all, so I put you on the grill a little bit, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Sure. Welcome.
Thank you for jumping in. I think that's brilliant, because that's the point. This is to share experience and point of view. So thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in and share anything. That's there's a little bit of time still if you have anything that you'd like to share or comment as well, that'd be really good. And if you have no more questions, well, I'm going to say thank you and see you very soon. So that was the first conference really dedicated to professionals. I usually do these conferences for families who want to maintain, cultivate, and thrive in their multilingualism with their children, because raising a child in multiple languages is not as easy as it seems. and some strategies are very useful for these families and for these children, and especially that we don't learn a language the same way depending on the age we are when we learn the language. So I think Lester pointed to that as well, that strategies have to be different depending on what age the child is when we teach them. So thank you very much for participating to this first conferences for professionals, because I think this is also something that is important to navigate the professional world, to understand how we work as multilinguals, what are our strengths, but also what are our challenges and how to overcome them. This is very useful, and thank you so much for contributing so well to the conversation today, Eleanor. And I'm so pleased to, like, we haven't chatted for a little bit, but we keep in touch, right? We keep in touch because I think this is what we do.
We keep running into each other in things that we don't expect, of course.
Exactly.
And you know, I do just want to say, Law, just to everybody out there who's listening, Law's mother of multilingual children herself. She is multilingual. She's incredibly passionate about supporting multilingualism. It is the future. You know, the reality is the more we get good at things like digital translators and stuff like that, the more we're going to be able to have our own individual languages, you know. So and she's so very incredibly open-minded and supportive of people who are bilingual and passionate about it. So definitely do take her up on her consultation offer if you're watching, because you know, she's a really valuable person to know, and she will go out of her way to be helpful.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Eleanor. That's lovely. That's lovely to say. So yes, if you have any more questions, if you feel that you want to go deeper, if you have questions, if you want strategies, do not hesitate to, well, follow simply on Facebook or on the website. The links are on the screen. You can also use your phone to just QR code, tag this QR code, and you will get on there straight away. Or you can book an appointment as well. So do not hesitate. It's completely free, 30 minutes, and make sure that you get some answers to your situation at the end of that. So I really hope that it was beneficial today, that you got something out of that. Do not hesitate to continue the conversation, and I really do hope to see some of you back, and maybe more people next time, probably, you know, January, February, somewhere around there, because otherwise it's going to be Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. See you later.
See you. Bye-bye.